Welcome to the Digital Academy of Enriching Arts. Here, we cross the boundaries of time to explore the greatest triumphs of human creativity. But to keep this journey going, we need a little help from you.
If you enjoy diving deep into the masterpieces of literature and philosophy, be sure to hit that like button. It helps us bring these timeless stories to more people. To ensure you never miss our latest explorations into the breathtaking worlds of classical music and fine art, hit subscribe and ring the bell. And if you want to help us build a community of true art lovers, share this channel with your friends. The Academy is always accepting new students.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into one of the absolute most dynamic cultural forces of the 20th century, rock music. But right off the bat, we've got to realize something kind of fascinating. Rock isn't really just a single musical tradition with strict boundaries. It's a dynamic, completely rule-breaking attitude. It's this massive crossroads where all sorts of different sounds collided to create a music of rebellion, freedom, and just continuous transformation. Okay, let's dive into this. If you look at the ancestral genres of rock, they each had a really distinct voice. The blues basically says, "This is what I feel." Jazz says, "Let's discover what we can create." Folk and country say, "Let me tell you what happened." But rock takes an entirely different stance. It crosses its arms and says, "I refuse to accept the world as it is." And that perfectly isolates rock's unique, rebellious identity. Right from its very inception, it has been the music of youth, of individuality, and of anger. It is constantly trying to break its own rules. Part 1. The collision of genres. Rock didn't just pop out of nowhere in a vacuum. It was practically a mathematical collision of existing American musical traditions. When we map out its ancestry, we see all these marginalized regional styles coming together like a giant puzzle. The blues brought its deep emotional language and that foundational guitar vocabulary. Country offered these driving rhythms and an act for storytelling. Gospel provided just incredible vocal intensity and that classic call and response dynamic. Rhythm and blues injected this undeniable groove, energy, and a real urban sound, while folk layered in the social consciousness. When you merge all these wildly distinct elements together, you get the foundation of rock and roll. It was a totally new recipe that grabbed the absolute best parts of its ancestors to create something louder, faster, and frankly, a lot more dangerous.
But to make this new music really ignite, it needed a spark, and that spark was actually a brand new demographic, the teenager. Following the post-World War II economic boom in the US, everything completely changed. Suddenly, for the very first time in history, young people actually had disposable income in their pockets. They had their own fashions. They desperately needed their own cultural and social identity, totally separate from their parents, and they needed a soundtrack to match it. Rock and roll became that exact soundtrack.
Now, it's absolutely crucial to realize that while Elvis Presley famously became the white face of mainstream rock and roll, the foundational innovations were overwhelmingly built by Black American pioneers. Sister Rosetta Tharpe was fusing gospel with the electric guitar way before rock was even mainstream. Then you have Chuck Berry, who literally defined the rock guitar language and made teenagers the actual subject matter of his songs, singing about school, cars, and romance. And we absolutely cannot forget Little Richard. He brought explosive physical energy, screaming vocals, and incredible flamboyance. These artists brought rhythm, gospel, and blues together in a way that just completely changed the world. Unsurprisingly, adults were completely terrified by this. They seriously thought the noise, the sexuality, and the sheer defiance of it all would literally bring about the end of civilization. But to the youth, rock provided a vital language of identity. Through their clothing, their dancing, and buying these records, young people weren't just passively listening to music. They were looking right at their parents and saying, "This is who I am."
Moving on to Part 2, expanding the sonic landscape.
So, as we transition out of the 1950s, the music crosses the Atlantic. British teenagers who had obsessively absorbed all those early American records start playing it back, and they completely revolutionize the genre. Central to this massive expansion was a new weapon, the electric guitar, driven by the riff. Now, a riff is a short, hypnotic musical pattern built on repetition. It essentially functions as the actual identity or the musical logo of a song.
The electric guitar stopped just being a background accompaniment. Amplified and distorted, it became a loud, super aggressive voice of its own that captures you immediately. You hear a great riff just once, and you instantly know exactly what song it is. And this brilliantly illustrates how incredibly rapidly the boundaries of the genre were pushed during this era. Just track the Beatles' evolution. In the early 1960s, they're playing really straightforward rock and roll and early pop. But by the mid-60s, they're already weaving in folk influences and deeply sophisticated songwriting. Cut to the late 60s, and they are fully diving into psychedelia and surrealism. By the end of the decade, they are absolute pioneers of studio experimentation. In just a few short years, they proved that a popular music album didn't just have to be a collection of catchy singles. It could be a highly conceptual, cohesive work of art. This conceptual shift led to a pretty incredible breakthrough. The recording studio itself actually became an instrument. Traditionally, the studio was literally just a room where you pressed record and tried to capture a live performance. But through crazy tape manipulation, backwards recordings, and multi-track recording, songs were totally transformed. They were no longer just captured moments. They became these lush, impossible-to-reproduce sonic landscapes. The recording itself was the art. All this massive expansion paved the way for heavy art and the absolute mythology of the guitar hero. You've got Jimi Hendrix completely transforming the guitar, turning it into a sound-generating machine filled with distortion and feedback, like he famously did at Woodstock. Led Zeppelin mastered dynamic contrast, moving from acoustic, pin-drop quiet to a heavy, earth-shattering explosion within the exact same song. Pink Floyd gave us massive, sprawling concept albums exploring madness and the human condition. And David Bowie introduced theatrical glam, proving for sure that a rock star could continually reinvent their own identity. Progressive and hard rock pushed the genre straight into the territory of serious music, creating massive spectacles and complex time signatures. Rock was getting huge. Which brings us to part 3, the cycle of rebellion. Remember what we realized right at the start? Rock constantly breaks its own rules. Well, by the mid to late 1970s, rock had kind of become a corporate, million-dollar industry bloated with 10-minute guitar solos and ridiculously expensive light shows. But a brand new ethos was brewing. So the crucial point is, punk emerged and its motto was basically, you don't need to be a virtuoso, you just need something to say. Punk hit the scene as a direct, incredibly aggressive rejection of all that technical polish and commercialism. It was essentially a massive reset button for the whole genre. Punk visually and sonically just stripped away all of the complexity of prog rock. It became entirely about short songs, speed, anger, simple chords, direct lyrics, and totally raw performance. Bands like the Sex Pistols and The Clash completely embodied this confrontation. They bypassed those expensive, fancy studios to prove that sometimes just 3 chords played with absolute raw conviction can say a whole lot more than 30 chords played with flawless precision. And, this instinct to rebel against excess, it just continued. If the traditional 1980s rock star was all about embracing fame, massive stadium spectacles, and corporate sponsorships, the 1990s Seattle grunge scene violently rejected all of it. Spearheaded by Kurt Cobain and Nirvana, alternative rock was completely defined by alienation and a total rejection of superficiality. It presented this really wild paradox: musicians who became world famous specifically for their authentic rejection of fame. So when we take a step back and look at the whole family tree, the connections are just incredible. From the raw rock and roll of Chuck Berry in the 50s, branching out into the British invasion and psychedelia of the 60s, then fragmenting into complex prog rock and aggressive punk in the 70s, morphing into alternative in the 80s, and eventually exploding into grunge in the 90s. This continuous fragmentation proves to us once and for all that rock isn't just one sound. It is an attitude toward making music. All right, part 4, the Great Rock Paradox. Let's slow down and reflect on the overarching reality of everything we've been discussing here. There is an inescapable, totally paradoxical cycle to this music. Now, what's really interesting about this is how predictable the cycle actually is. First, the music is born as a rebellion against the establishment. Then, it becomes wildly successful, morphing into a massive, corporate, billion-dollar industry itself. Finally, a brand new generation comes along, looks at that corporate bloat, and rebels against the old rock to return the music to its raw roots. The rebel inevitably becomes the establishment, forcing the genre to continuously destroy and rebuild itself. So, why does any of this actually matter to us? Well, because throughout this endless cycle of rebellion, rock has served as an incredible mirror for human identity. Think about it. In the 50s, it gave youth a voice. I am young. The 60s shouted, I am free. The 70s proudly declared, I am an artist. The 80s realized, I can reinvent myself. And the 90s pushed back hard with, I don't belong to your world. Rock has repeatedly given individuals a really powerful public voice, creating a community where literally thousands of outcasts can pack into a concert hall and temporarily become one. Because at the core of every massive riff, every distorted chord, and every smashed guitar is this one fundamental question: who am I? Rock is inherently a tool for exploring our own consciousness. It's an open invitation to figure out your own identity entirely outside of what society tells you to be. Ultimately, rock is profoundly a history of our relationship with machines. Every single time a new piece of technology is invented, whether it's an amplifier in the 50s, synthesizer in the 70s, or a digital sampler today, it will eventually just become a brand new tool for the next generation's rebellion. The actual sound, that will always change, but that defiant attitude is forever. Thank you for joining me on this explainer. So the next time you turn on the radio or open your streaming app, you have to ask yourself, what is the next generation getting ready to rebel against right now?